I know this, and you know this, but for some reason it still needs to be said. Everyone, everybody, deserves to feel a sense of belonging at work. That they are valued, they are included, they're treated equally, with the same opportunities. Unfortunately, many don't have that feeling or that reality, including the LGBTQIA+ community. Now here's an example. If you just heard that list of letters that came out of my mouth and wondered, why does it have to be so many? Well, that's the person that needs to figure out how well they really are in improving DEIB at work. And those are the people we need to help understand their impact and help them do better. My guests today have some experience in building that sense of belonging, but it hasn't been easy. And they have some stories to tell and some steps that we can take. Hold on. Welcome back to Relationships at Work, the leadership guide to creating a workplace we love. I'm your host, Russel Lolliker, a communications and leadership nerd with a couple of decades of experience and a whole heaping amount of curiosity on how we can all make the workplace a better place. This show is a great place to start, and that's what I want to do today. Just get started, get right into it. One of the biggest drivers for me, for this show, for a lot of what I do, was always around hating how people can treat other people so badly, intentionally or unintentionally. It's what led me to leading conversations around customer service and customer experience with my old brand, the Upsell, and what really led me to pivot a few years ago into the employee experience arena and this show. It's also why DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusivity, and belonging is a reoccurring theme on this show, and it's not going to stop anytime soon. People, all people deserve that respect and consideration. So reading these nationwide poll results just broke my heart. From a survey from the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, they did a survey across the United States. They found that 46% of LGBTQ+ employees say they're still closeted. Also, 1 in 5 LGBTQ+ workers report having been told or had coworkers implied they should dress in a more feminine or masculine manner. The top reason that this survey found that LGBTQ+ workers don't report negative comments they hear about LGBTQ+ people to a supervisor or human resources? Simply, they don't think anything would be done about it, and they don't want to hurt their relationships with coworkers. Heartbreaking. My two guests today are on a mission of inclusivity. They've started some pretty big employee resource groups to support LGBTQIA+ in the organizations they've worked in, and they've carried on that work into their consultancy. So what can we do to create a more inclusive culture for the LGBTQIA+ community in the workplace? John and Peter have a few ideas, but not without sharing the challenges that await. But it's an important and necessary journey to take. Over to them. And on the show today, we have John Volturo and Peter Gandolfo, and here is why they are awesome. John is a professional certified coach, PCC for short. We love our acronyms. Executive coach, C-suite advisor, and partner at Evolution, which is a boutique coaching, consulting, and investment firm helping organizations drive success through leadership and culture. Also the CEO and executive coach at Strategic MGMT 360, which helps leaders with their media needs. He has this 2021 President of the International Coaching Federation trophy, medal. I don't know how they do that, but still pretty lofty. And a couple of decades in corporate C-suite marketing and leadership roles. I'm not done yet, even though my breath is running out. We've got Peter to talk about. He's a fellow partner at Evolution, an ICF PCC certified executive coach. We love our acronyms. Facilitator and consultant. He's also flexing executive muscle coaching at Gandolfo Group, which helps leaders build on their natural strengths. Then there's that 24 plus years of experience in marketing management and consulting, where he worked with such organizations as Mattel, the Drucker Institute, and the Ford Motor Company. Both are advocates for inclusivity, diversity, and a better LGBTQ plus workplace experience, which is why they're here today. Hello, John. Hello, Peter.
Hi,
Hello,
Russell.
Russell. Thank you.
I wish I had you to introduce me every time. You've
Yeah,
got such energy.
that was great.
Anytime you walk into a room, I'll be your hype man. How's that? Does that work?
I love it.
That works. That works.
So humble we all are. Perfect. So let's start. I have to start every episode by asking you each the same question I ask in every episode, which is what's your best or worst employee experience? You don't have to do both, just one or the other.
Hmm. Ooh.
I can go.
Go.
So, my best working experience or employee experience was at my time at Mattel. I spent close to a little bit over 9 years there. Half of my time was on the Barbie brand, which is having a bit of a pop culture moment right now.
A little bit.
The other half was on our entertainment portfolio. I worked on the Disney business. And while I was there, my husband and I got married. And at the time, it wasn't even legal to get married in California. We actually had to fly to New York to do this. But there's a tradition at Mattel that when people go through milestones, if the team member's been there for a while, they will do something to commemorate it by creating a special packaging or a special toy. And the team of designers made Ken dolls in our wedding suits in our likeness. And it was touching on so many levels. One, it was customary for brides to be acknowledged in this way with dolls. It wasn't so customary in that time for grooms to be acknowledged. And just to really feel seen and just for bringing my whole self to work, it was very touching.
That's amazing. That's I can't ever top that. I don't think I've never been immortalized as a Ken doll. That's phenomenal. Top that, John.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll top that. I have a different version of a story. I had a similar one with my wedding too, but I'll talk about this one because I'm gonna say like my worst actually turned into my best. So I had a situation where I just got out of college and I got my first job. I was in the entertainment industry in New York City, where you think everything's really progressive and liberal. And I was ambitious. I had grown up a welfare kid. I wanted to succeed in my life and show people that you can leave Brooklyn and make something of yourself. And I asked what would I need to do to get a promotion at this first job that I was at. And they said basically in no, in a different way, you're gay, you don't really have a chance. So I knew right at that moment, like the glass ceiling, the rainbow glass ceiling that maybe you've heard of, occurred for me. But what it did for me is when I did go back to get an MBA and go back into the workplace, it made me recognize the importance of having really diverse cultures. And I built diverse teams everywhere I went because I was in leadership positions. And as a result of that, I had really high retention with my teams, a lot of loyalty, a lot of the ability to get things done, and it became a model for a lot of the other companies that I worked within for the other groups. So it became something that diversity was modeled with my team, and then it grew into something before it was even quote unquote a thing. So that was something that I always felt really proud of, having that type of lens through which to look, and it came from having actually a bad experience.
I don't want to go much further without touching on exactly what you had said, which was the rainbow glass ceiling.
Hmm.
Now, I haven't heard it as much, and it may be a common phrase in other industries, but I have not heard it much. I've heard the broken rung, or when it
Hmm.
comes to women going
Right.
up the corporate quote unquote corporate ladder,
Hmm.
but not the rainbow glass ceiling. Could you explain what that means for a lot of people who may not understand that?
Sure. For the rainbow glass ceiling, it's really this idea that for people who are part of the LGBTQIA plus community, there's this ceiling. We don't see people who are actually in really high level executive jobs. And as a result, our ability to rise to top levels is much less. So we don't see that being modeled, and companies don't actually see the benefit of bringing people up all the way because it's a risk for them in many cases. So what happens is there's a glass ceiling, you can only go far. And similar to, a glass ceiling of the broken rung for women, it impacts your career. It impacts the long-term growth that you have in terms of your lifetime income. And one of the things that needs to be done to break through the glass ceiling is for people like me who rose to the top of in a C-suite position to then bring other people up and then model it. And it's a responsibility that we all have no matter which group we're in. um, because it's the only way we'll all succeed and we'll all have all the opportunities. So when I experienced that glass ceiling, I knew that that wasn't going to be the end of me. I got an MBA, and then when I went back to the music industry in New York City, I made sure that I created that atmosphere of success for everybody else by modeling it with my leadership.
So I'm kind of curious, and I hear from your example, and I know from Peter's history of starting employee resource groups around LGBTQ plus and so forth. Why are you responsible for changing diversity and improving diversity in organizations? Like, obviously, you are passionate because you are part of the diversity.
Yeah.
But whose responsibility is it?
It's a good question. For me, I'll answer it just from my perspective. I think it's everybody's responsibility. I think it's everybody's responsibility. I also think it's always been everybody's responsibility, and people just didn't pay attention to it for various reasons in different places in the country, all across the world. And for me, because I did have a position that had authority associated with, and because I knew what it felt like to be marginalized and othered at work and at home, I knew I could do something about it. And if I did something about it, maybe people would also do something about it on their teams. And it did. It worked. It worked for me. And it was prior to DEI initiatives that we're seeing today. We're talking about 20 years ago now.
But we fixed diversity. It's on posters. We've got organizations that are talking about these. Well, we've fixed diversity or any DEI by doing these grand gestures, by doing these advertising campaigns where it's Pride Week, so all these organizations are suddenly the most supportive thing you've ever seen in the world. So how is there this such disconnect between this lip service versus every survey I've ever seen about LGBTQ plus are being supported in real life in the workplace?
So I think that's a good question. And I think that there's this misperception that we have equal rights and that there are no microaggressions, and then going to work every day is just rainbows and, unicorns like my kids would love it to be. But it isn't that. The reality is that the lip service that you hear is very real in certain companies. Like, for example, when I am looking at the Fortune 10, 100% of them have, anti-discrimination clauses for both orientation as well as gender identity. But the on the grounds, the boots on the grounds in all the different locations of those offices across the country, the experience is different because it's driven a lot by the people who work there and the values of that particular community. So we may not see a uniform actual execution of these rights that we quote unquote have, even under Title VII, where we're not supposed to be discriminated against. And that's where the actual tension occurs for many people. And remember, you may not know this, Russell, but just about 50% of the American workforce who is gay is actually out. 50% of the people are not out for various reasons, including not feeling safe.
I'll share a personal experience that echoes what John just shared. My first job out of business school was at Ford Motor Company, and they were highly rated on human rights campaigns, Equality Index, which in the U.S. is a metric that is often used to measure how LGBTQ plus friendly an organization is. And I found their rating to be to high, and it was very affirming to me when I decided to go. And I quickly realized when you've got companies of any size, especially really large ones, just because a company has policies that are inclusive, it doesn't mean that everybody is living out those values and those practices day to day.
I think a lot of organizations don't get and you've illustrated it perfectly, is they think because it's their corporate culture that's inclusive, they're fine, not realizing there's a million subcultures that are not, because people are people, and to be blunt, assholes are assholes. So they are different within those subcultures that cannot be overseen by an organization as large as a Ford or someplace. So you bring up a point that I wanted to talk about, which is this show is very much about the employee journey and the employee experience. And you went in and applied to an organization that had this certification that was, saying all the right things as somebody that's applying for a new job. But are there red flags? Are there things somebody from the LGBTQ plus community could be looking for to look for things that are supportive or not supportive when they're applying for those jobs?
So what could someone look for other than the HRC rating? Um, I I would be looking to, if I were interviewing with a company, I would be asking to speak with diverse members of their team. Yes, I would love to speak with someone that is part of the LGBTQIA plus community, but I'd also want to speak to people from other underrepresented groups and hear what their experience is. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to get the full experience, but it increases the likelihood versus having people in corporate staffing or the hiring manager giving the stock answer that they would provide to everyone. I'd be looking at things like if I have the opportunity to interview in the offices, to what extent do you see people getting to express themselves in the space? I'm sure we're all accustomed to seeing heterosexual couples showing photos of their families or their spouses, but where do you get to see the people that are underrepresented? How comfortable do they feel bringing their whole selves to work?
Yeah. I would add to that, Russell, that there are some tools that people can use too. Like if you go to Glassdoor, for example, you're going to get a good feel whether or not it's an inclusive environment. And I think another thing I would add to what Peter said is try to figure out if the company is actually fostering psychological safety. If they have open communication, do they create spaces for people? And is there a sense of belonging? And one of the ways to see if there's actually a sense of belonging it's kind of like a sideways view is to see how innovative the company is. Because if a company is truly innovative, it's getting a lot of feedback from diverse people within the teams itself to help build something that's really next generation.
What can an organization do, whether it's hiring, whether it's in the onboarding process, to be more inclusive, whether it's in their language, in their steps? Like, what is it that they can do to be more welcoming in that initial space for new employees?
I think, Frank, straight up asking the question of a new hire, what is it that you need from us to feel supported and welcome here? For me, when I got hired by Ford, it was them paying to fly my partner out so that we could look at housing together. And their official policy was, no, we only fly out spouses that are married. And they were willing to look at the context of the situation, especially at that time, that wasn't even an option. And they adjusted the policy to accommodate my need in that situation.
You've both had a bit of success when it comes to creating communities around, like I said, ERGs and so forth. What did you need to be successful from the organization? Because I mean, you're not an island. You have to have some support in some way. What did that look like?
Yeah. When I started the employee resource group at Mattel, one of the most valuable pieces of support was that there was an executive that was in charge of diversity and inclusion. And while she put the onus on me as a member of the community to initiate the employee resource group, she was there to provide support where I got stuck and where I needed additional resources. So if it was in coming up with the charter documents, she was there to help me because she had charted that path with the launching of multiple other employee resource groups. I think the second thing would be encouraging connection with the other employee resource groups. For me, I learned a lot from the Black employee resource group, from women at Mattel, from a lot of the others that come before me about what worked, what was challenging, how did they work through different obstacles. And then I think you need access to senior leadership, even when their initial reaction to what you're asking for might be no. So as an example, one of the things that at the time Mattel was getting dinged on the HRC equality rating was that we at the time were not offering gender reassignment surgery to trans people that wanted to have the surgery. And I give a lot of credit to the C-suite leadership at that time that while they had hesitancy, they were willing to sit down and have the conversation and talk through the scenarios. So a leadership that's willing to stay open to being wrong and to changing their minds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. I would add that something that we all have to do and really do well and consistently and have a voice in is being advocates for ourselves. And I think, talking about what Peter just said, it's whatever example matters for you. If you need something, the ability to feel safe enough to ask it, to me, is almost a requirement within the workplace. You should be able to ask for what you need in order to be successful. And it should be something that addresses who you are as a whole person, like Peter was just describing, rather than just a component of you. The organization is going to be much more successful if you show up authentically every day in a way that is unfettered and you can get through your day without feeling like it takes extra energy because you're hiding things.
I want to tap in just ERG. One more question about that is around charters, because I find those interesting because, to be honest, I haven't seen a charter that wasn't immediately written and put in the shelf and never looked at again for almost any product or any initiative that an organization's putting together. But for an ERG to be successful or any community successful, the charter is one of the most powerful communications tools you can have. How did you use it for it to be effective in an organization that maybe was a little resistant or didn't understand?
Well, I admittedly can't say that I used it the way that I would advise using it, but
Fair.
What I would coach people to do is to have a commitment to revisiting it at least once a year, particularly as they're doing their goal setting. It allows leadership, especially if there's been a changeover in leadership, to remind themselves of what the initial charter was. Do we need to update it? How can we make sure that our goals are aligned with this charter so that they're more likely to achieve what it is that they're seeking to achieve?
Yeah, I never thought I'd ask the charter question, but when it comes to things like something that's as important as this, where people to feel inclusive, you need to have boundaries and understanding of what the goal is and everything. And I find those to be extremely powerful and just not used nearly enough. So I love the idea of at least revisiting it, because you can get buy-in from executive and that executive lasts 6 months and they're gone and you're starting at zero,
Right.
or even taking steps back from negative zero in a lot of sense. Negative zero is not a thing. Good math, Russell. So there's a few things that I've sort of seen that really help with making it easier for LGBTQ employees to feel seen, to feel involved, ERGs being one of them. How do you see hybrid work models supporting that?
Yeah. So that's great. I think that hybrid work models are really amazingly effective for folks who are part of marginalized communities, especially LGBTQIA plus folks, because we are often afraid to bring our whole selves to work, and it restricts our ability to work for certain companies. If you live in a state that maybe doesn't have a lot of big companies and you want to work for a big corporation and it's located elsewhere, you can now have that opportunity. If you want to work in a state where you could also live openly with your family, if you're married and you have kids or whatever type of relationship you have, maybe you're not going to want to move to a state that is trying to restrict your rights. So the hybrid workspace allows you to work for a company that may be one of those beacons of progressivity, I guess, within a location that is not, and it affords that person who is marginalized the opportunity to work there. And I think that's really important, because it comes down to safety for people. And if they have that extra level of safety, then it's great. It's great for people who are disabled as well. It's great for anyone who really has issues with moving to a certain location for fear of A, B, or C.
What we also hear from a lot of people from underrepresented groups, including people in the LGBTQIA community, is that when they got to work from home, they also got to avoid a whole lot of microaggressions. And if that was something that they were dealing with day to day, they would much rather stay at home and just get to focus on doing their job. That's not true for everyone, but for those that were experiencing it, it's really nice to have that option.
Yeah. It's much more subtle though, Russell, with hybrid work, right? Because a lot of the microaggressions actually happen within work meetings. People are overlooked. People are not asked to share their voice. So it's a little bit more difficult within a hybrid environment if you're doing something virtual, but it does offer the person, like Peter said too, the ability to just kind of show up and maybe experience less of that kind of emotional turmoil that people who are part of the community experience, because work is just a reflection of what's happening outside of the office.
So you bring up a very common scenario, the meeting, whether it's virtual, whether it's in person. I'm trying to understand as well the challenges that a member of the LGBTQ plus community may be experiencing, that someone that's cis or others that do not understand some of the challenges or may be dismissive of things that are quite impactful to someone in that community. What are some examples of the challenges that might be not obvious to those that are living in that world?
I'm still processing it. Are you thinking about challenges to the people that they serve from that community, or more to the employees, Russell?
More within the workplace. So for instance, say as a white cis male, I'm in a meeting that somebody says something off the cuff that might not register to me as quickly as those that are impacted or diminished by those same comments.
Right.
As I work on my education, as I work on my awareness, I need to recognize that those are issues and that I am an other to that impact.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that LGBTQIA people often will have a heightened awareness around things that might not land in a comfortable way for them, but also for other people. I can think of countless times where I've heard the R word said to describe something that didn't make sense or wasn't working well. And I don't want to pretend that the reason that I noticed it and others didn't is because I was gay, but it certainly bothered me. I even think about maybe some of the selections that a group might make for when and how they meet. Even something like a team building exercise. I've been part of groups that have said, like, let's go do a golf outing. You know what? There's a large percentage of the population that has zero interest in golf.
I'm one of them.
And
no interest.
And so it's okay. Maybe we don't avoid things like that all the time, but if we're going to do a golf outing one time, what would be something that would be appealing to the rest of the group that isn't interested in golf the next time?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I sat at the executive leadership table as a C-suiter for many years, and always was the token gay person at the table. And I would hear things that they didn't really necessarily think were offensive. Like they would call another coworker, "Oh, he's not brave enough to do something. He's a sissy." Or they would say things like, they would comment on the way somebody dresses. Like he dresses effeminately, or he dresses like a woman. I've had all of these things that I've heard in meetings where I've had to kind of, hold the desk so I didn't start yelling, right? And calm down, and then they say, that's not cool. You can't say those types of things. And it ranges from jokes to the sporting analogy that Peter just mentioned. And I'll tell you one thing, something for me personally that I feel, and I've shared this before, but I'm going to share it again, even though it's not something I'm proud of. But when my husband and I were going through the process of having kids, I remember thinking, now when I'm at that table with the other C-suiters, I'm going to be able to have something in common with them because they all have kids. Because beyond that, I was just doing my job as a good marketer, and building good teams. So you feel it from all different angles, Russell, and you hear it and experience it from all different angles. And people around tables, leadership tables, team tables, whatever level, they don't feel very safe to stand up and say something like that's wrong. So it just perpetuates.
John, your share is reminding me of something really crude that used to be said on a team that I was on, which was we were in client service, and if there was something where the client was going to be really difficult and you needed to just take it, they would say, you need to just bend over and bring the Vaseline.
Oh, wow.
And we would people would laugh about it, and it was almost this normalized language. listening to that in the version of who I am today, that's not okay at all.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, let's talk about belonging for a moment.
I'm sorry for bringing such a heavy topic.
No, I'm glad you bring that up. I mean, it's difficult to hear, and my empathy and compassion muscle is going huge right now. But at the same time, if people don't understand the impact of their words, of their actions at work, they're not going to change because they don't understand that there's an impact. It's this leadership that doesn't understand the impact of their words at work and then just goes blindly on, not understanding the wreckage behind them. So I appreciate both your honesty and vulnerability in sharing that. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
You both were amazing champions by creating this, I'm just getting the title here, Gay Men's Leadership Circle, or circles, plural. So it was a peer group for directors, managers, and C-suite leaders, as I read it. Could you explain what that is? Because I want to give a sense of what belonging is supposed to look like in an organization that's championing this.
Sure. So there's many different ways that people can engage in coaching. One way is through one-on-one experience with a coach. An alternative that we wanted to create, in part to create a greater sense of community, was a group coaching experience. So what we would do is bring together anywhere from 6 to 10 leaders. They would often be from different industries, different stages in their careers, but all having the shared experience of being men who are part of the LGBTQ community. We've started to expand the language to be inclusive of our bisexual and queer participants, because frankly, some of the men that have signed up don't identify with the label of gay. But the idea behind it is that we can have a mix of content that we would bring that would allow people on their own to process individually, potentially share some of what's coming up for them, and learn from each other. In addition to that, there would be some coaching that we would do. And even if only one person, let's say, Russell, you're the part of the group and you're receiving coaching from the group, everybody else gets to learn from your experience. We may be processing something that is analogous to what it is that you're working on. We may be exercising our own skills in asking good coaching questions so that we can bring that skill back to the leaders that we work with. The ultimate goal is that people are feeling a little bit less lonely in their leadership and able to make progress on the specific objectives that they have, whether it's professional or personal.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I'd say think of it, Russell, and for those who are listening, as the ultimate safe space where your identity is welcome, so that you could actually get the stuff done that you want to. You can bring in your personal stories, you can bring in your work stories, and you don't have that barrier, that film between who I am authentically and who I actually portray myself to be when I'm in mixed environments. So think of it as ultimately the ability to do it safely, to get all the things that Peter just talked about done within a team. And we see that we're able to help people move beyond humongous obstacles that they face every day, because they just feel like they can show up as themselves.
So where do you start? You're a leader in an organization. You have no idea how inclusive or not inclusive your organization is, but you still want to you want to take those steps forward in making a difference and improving DEIB in the organization. Where do you start? Through actions, not posters.
One place that I might be inclined to start is with a listening session. How can we better understand what the experience is for the people that are part of our team? There are engagement tools that are out there that you can use that are specifically able to measure it on DEIB. But you could also do custom ones or even live interviews. When Evolution will sometimes do this for organizations, and we'll encourage them to invite a cross section of employees. We don't need to just talk to the C-suite. I want to talk to people at all levels of the organization. I want to speak to people from marginalized communities. I want to better understand what their experiences are. What are the moments that are really difficult? if they could imagine a better environment, what would that look like? Because it's a lot easier for us as the external partners to come back and present what we heard and what ideas we have that would support that and how it matches up with the experience of other organizations we work with. It tends to land a lot better than asking one person from a marginalized community to walk into the corner office and say, I don't feel safe.
I think that, if we're going to make the change, you have to start someplace. And that's one of the best places to start. You want to understand the landscape first.
So say you're going down that path. How do you know your organization isn't ready? And should you go ahead anyway?
Yeah. Well, let me jump in with that one, because I was thinking about that as Peter was talking. So I have a former marketing background, right? So I think a lot about surveys. And as Peter was talking, I was thinking, let's not survey people if we're not going to make any changes, because we're not ready to do it, because it takes fortitude. It takes consistency. It takes having the best people around you who are creating this inclusive environment. And if you don't have the bandwidth, the resources, the time to do this, it's not great to start something and not finish it, especially when we're talking about people's lives.
Plus one to that, John. I remember speaking to a client in 2021 who made a conscious decision in all of the responsiveness to the murder of George Floyd that they didn't do Blackout Tuesday. They didn't make public announcements around their initiatives because they wanted to take the time to get it right and not be reactionary. And it would be far more damaging for someone to take action either publicly or within an organization when they're not willing to continue the work than to just do nothing at all.
I can't imagine how heartbreaking it would be to any member of an organization to see a leader doing a checkbox exercise and then nothing ever being followed up when they have that any type of hope of feeling like you belong and having it taken away. I feel almost as, I can't imagine what that would feel like.
Russell, it's happening already. Maybe not, we're not hearing about it as much within the LGBTQIA community, but we're definitely hearing about it with DEI initiatives where they're dismantling whole teams across the country, right? They had these promises they made and they're pulling back on them. And there are a lot of people who were in those former positions out of work. It does happen. And it's not a good thing to have happen. It sends a signal to not only your employees, but also your customers who maybe have a certain perception of you. So it could have damage to the bottom line. It could have damage to morale, which leads to damage to the bottom line. So it's something to be considered very carefully. And if you're going to do it and stay with it, because guess what? Those people don't disappear. They're still your employees.
I don't know, Russell, if it was circulating in Canada, but a few weeks ago, there were 4 executives at major studios in Hollywood that were heads of diversity and inclusion, all of them ousted in the matter of a few days. And it's like one person turned over, you can say, well, it's just natural attrition. They must have found another job. But what's going on that 4 people are all being moved out of their positions all at the same time?
And wasn't that the first, as much as I hate using the word, the man's name, Elon Musk, the first thing he did at Twitter was eliminate all the ERGs. It was one of the first things he did when he moved. And he's done a lot of things since, but it was one of the first actions. And why is that? Why is that the first thing you do? I'm not going to, that guy's got enough, but yeah, I was amazed. I'm like, okay, this is the slippery slope.
If I had been an employee there at the time, that would have been the signal to me that it was time to leave.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was actually coaching and doing workshops on healthy conversations at Twitter when all that happened. Everything that was actually happening within the company was also being talked about on Twitter.
Right, of course.
So you heard it firsthand from many people. So it wasn't good. And then that kind of did lead to maybe, okay, if he can do it, maybe we can do it too. Or maybe we can spend less time focusing on it.
So interesting you say that, because I've heard in a lot of interviews that I was listening to about the downsizing they did so severely that other tech organizations were like, well, if they can still operate so lean, so can we, which immediately takes away the humanity of an organization and just put It's about the cogs in the wheel, not about the humanity. And that's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, agreed.
One question I noticed, doing a little bit of research on both of you, I noticed something called an LGBTBE, Business Enterprise Certified Business.
Yes.
I am not as familiar. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. So in the United States, we have something called the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. And if you join the Chamber of Commerce and you are someone who's part of the community, you can get designated as a LGBT business enterprise. And what that affords you is opportunities for companies. A lot of them are very large companies. We're talking about American Express all the way down to utilities in different states. They have to meet certain quotas by hiring diversity. So it enables you to get access to those particular job opportunities that may exist. So as a small business owner, it could be an advantage for an LGBTQIA plus owner to have that designation. And in certain states too, Russell, like California, you can get one as well. So it helps you also with state procurement departments, et cetera. And every state has a version of it. Maybe somewhere as overt as like California does, where we both live.
I asked for clarity because I know some of my listeners are not from America. They're from Europe. They're from Australia. So they have much different resources and supports when it comes to the LGBTQ plus community. So I just want to make sure that they're aware that these things exist if their own community doesn't understand or know about them. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I guess my last question is, are you hopeful? Because, I mean, I'm looking at the surveys and the stats, and they don't look great when it comes to DEI. And as we were talking about people getting removed from organizations, but you two have been such champions of this, of belonging for your community. Are you still hopeful, or is it just like, we're still getting, we take 2 steps back?
I continue to be hopeful. That doesn't mean that day-to-day life or for any specific person, it's necessarily that easy. But I do feel like we are taking more steps forward than back. I do worry about some of the bigger political landscape. It can feel a lot more challenging to be out in 2023, particularly for our siblings. Use that term for our for our non-binary and trans siblings within the community. And I feel particularly empowered to take the stance of even if I don't feel like I'm being targeted, I need to be speaking up on behalf of them and supporting them.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a place where if you have any sort of privilege and you believe that belonging is really important, take a stance. And that's what keeps me optimistic because, we're lucky, Peter and I are lucky to be in a community where people are incredibly supportive of all of the diversity around us, and we embrace it and we want it. People don't see that around them, and they need folks who do see it around them to champion it so that it can roll itself out across all the different communities of America and make it be the standard versus kind of like the deviation that happens in the big cities and the blue places.
Well, that leads me to my last question for both of you gentlemen, which is, what's one simple action, and it could be related to our conversation today, it doesn't have to, what's one simple action people can do right now to improve their relationships at work?
The one that comes to mind for me is for people to check in with each other. And I don't mean starting every conversation with how are you doing, but if you've worked with a coach, you'll often find that they'll start conversations with an open-ended question that gives people space to really acknowledge where they are and how they're showing up in this moment. And even if you're doing a large group session on Zoom, to simply give people permission to share one word and chat on what it's like to be them. It allows them to feel a little bit more seen and be a little more present, and it allows others to get to know them just a little bit more.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. One of the things I do when I'm working with one-on-one executives is we create a relationship map. And the relationship map basically is making a list of all the key relationships that you need to have to be in a really healthy spot, like a green spot, for example. I'll use color as an example, because they're going to help you and your team and the company get to where it needs to go. and make that list. And then the current state of the relationship, is it red, yellow, or green? What do you want the desired state to be, red, yellow, or green? And create the pathway to that. If you really want to have great relationships within the organization, it's helpful to understand where they are today and what it would take to get them to where they need to be. And often when you're spending your time on building relationships, like Peter said, and deepening connections with people, and you're having those check-ins with people, it could be as simple as a check-in. You can take a relationship that's red or yellow and move it to green.
That is John Volturo and Peter Gandolfo, both PCC certified executive coaches, C-suite advisors and partners at Evolution, and both strong advocates for DEIB for the LGBTQIA+ community. Yes. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being here.
Thanks, Russell.
Thanks for having us.
And that's it. That's all. Another episode of Relationships at Work, the leadership guide to creating a workplace we love. My name's Russell Lolliker. Thanks again for joining. If you have a moment, please share this episode or any episodes you've loved of Relationships at Work with a friend. Just an email, casual conversation, maybe a text message of something you learned, or maybe an episode you think that they should listen to or share themselves. Yeah, just share it off with a friend. It really helps the episodes and the show grow on its own. And that support means the world to me. So thank you so very much. And we'll catch you next time.